You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to Cinema Salsa, your tasty condiment of film talk. I'm your host, Stephen White, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Philip Peck.
Hello.
You doing all right?
I am awake.
Awake.
I am alive.
So you're alive. I mean, it's better to be alive than not, right?
I don't know. I was fine for the billions of years that I wasn't alive, so.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I guess we all have those regrets that we weren't born way back when. That's a deep philosophical thing. I don't want to get into that. So, because I got a headache. Maybe I don't. Who knows? Anyway, so what have you been watching here lately? There's been a little bit of a gap since we last chatted. And there's bound to have been something that came out between now and then.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the last time we talked, what we talked about in terms of movies and stuff that we watched. I think the things that I've watched since then are The Empty Man, Kate, The Man with the Iron Fists, Shang-Chi, Hero, and Phoenix. That's all that I have notated on my letterbox, so I might have missed a thing or two, but that seems like plenty anyway.
Were there any out of that lot that stood out as something that you really want to drive home? I know The Empty Man was something you were talking about.
I really did. Well, yeah, The Empty Man was pretty good. It was. It's been a few weeks since I watched it though, so it's not real fresh in my mind. But yeah, it had a lot of really good stuff in it. Definitely recommend. It's it's kind of it's horror, but it's not like, it's more kind of like psychological, suspenseful. Maybe it starts out kind of as a horror movie and then changes more to kind of almost like a procedural in a way, kind of a detective story kind of. So it's kind of a little bit of a genre crossover. And it's kind of it's maybe a little bit too long, so it definitely has some space in there to kind of straddle a couple different genres. But yeah, it's definitely worth watching. I think it was released kind of like in mid-pandemic or early in the pandemic, and just kind of put out into theaters when nobody was really paying attention. It kind of came and went real quick. But it's gained a lot of word of mouth, I think, and a lot of it's turning into sort of a streaming cult classic in a way.
Right.
So it's got some fans now. So definitely, if you're into those kinds of genre movies that have some philosophical kind of questions and stuff. So it's kind of one of those deep movies that you could maybe get into if you're a 21-year-old and smoking a doober in your college dorm, that kind of movie. So yeah, it was fun. I liked it.
All right.
Without giving anything away. The first act, or like the opening act, I guess, is really good. It's really good. That's the most horror part of it, I think. And then it changes time and changes cast and characters. It's almost kind of like a little standalone short film, that opening sequence or opening act. It's pretty cool. So
interesting. Yeah, I know that when you'd mentioned it before, you were kind of talking highly of it, and I need to get to it.
Yeah,
it's one of those I need to get around to.
And I'm not super familiar with the protagonist. It's an actor named James Badge Dale. Although I know I've seen him, like he's kind of one of those faces that you'll recognize, but maybe not unless you're kind of a fan of his. But he's kind of he really carries the movie pretty well.
Yeah.
So
I know I've heard that name, but I couldn't tell you from
yeah,
what.
I'm sure if you Googled him and saw, he has kind of a very distinctive face full of crags and creases and stuff like that. So, Kate on Netflix, did you see that one?
No,
it's another one of these like assassin movies where it's like assassin wants out of the biz and then one last job, blah blah blah. It's really not very good. It's kind of like a John Wick starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead. It's yeah. I wouldn't go out of my way to check that one out. And then Shang-Chi, of course. I don't have a whole lot to say about that. It is what it is. I'm sure anybody who hasn't seen it by now probably couldn't care less. And if you did care, you've probably already seen it. So it was fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's a Marvel movie. If, you go into that already kind of being like, well, I know what to expect for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And you hope for a few twists and turns. And not to say that it was good for what it was. It wasn't like, oh, my, mind-blowing, just you broke my brain type Marvel movie. But overall, it was entertaining.
It had some really great set pieces, I think, action and stunts.
Yeah, for sure.
And but suffers from that last third, which I think all Marvel movies, for the most part, do, in that it's just kind of like a CGI battle fest between man and CGI beast. And this one, I think it held some drama and some tension better than some of them do. But still, I think the first third of the movie's way more. Maybe third to half of the movie's the best part, and then the last third is probably the least interesting part. But it was really cool to see people like Tony Leung and Michelle Yeoh in like a big action movie for like Western audiences. And they're such huge movie stars, worldwide movie stars, but probably not super well known to kind of a mainstream American audience. And they're such great actors and stuff. So that was cool to have them in there. And I think that's about it.
Excellent.
What about you?
I honestly don't feel like I've watched a lot of movies. I feel like I've been watching a lot of TV.
What's that? TV?
Yeah.
Well, that helps.
Probably not even great TV. It's just, the comfort TV. Mm-hmm. But I mean, for the most part, like I'm trying to think of a few.
My wife's
that I'll
been
watch.
binging Buffy the Vampire Slayer on Amazon, which is her all-time favorite show, and I've been watching some episodes here and there with her.
I've never watched it, to be
Oh my
honest.
God, really?
No.
That seems like it would be your favorite show if you ever watched it.
I've heard it's really good, and I guess it came on at a time that it wasn't in my wheelhouse at the time.
Wow, that's
but I've
so
always
surprising.
heard good things, so I should check it out. I know my wife's
Joss
watched.
Whedon, you were you must have been a teenager to young man when it was kind of when it was airing.
I mean, I remember the movie when it came out.
Yeah, I do
and
too.
then
But
I watched that, but when I saw the show, I was like, nah, I'm not watching that.
you must have had kind of a bias against the WB or whatever, one of the.
Well, see, that's the funny thing. I watch a lot of their shows now. That's in fact what I've been binge watching, because I watched Stargirl, which is based on a lesser-known DC property, and it's kind of a nice throwback to old Golden Age heroes and stuff like that, because they tap and touch on some of those older iterations of superheroes like the Flash or the Green Lantern. Like before they are who they are today, they've got those, like where Flash looked like Hermes with the metal hat and all that stuff. So it's kind of a nice throwback to that, but again, modernized, and they do utilize some of the older costume designs. They don't really make them look too modern, which I thought was kind of neat. So, I mean, it's been entertaining for what it is. And this show, the other show that I've been watching, it's Superman and Lois, and I wasn't sure if I would actually like it, but I think I like it because they're doing something that has not been done before with Superman. And that is, what if Superman, what if we get to see him actually be a father? Because in the show, he and Lois are married. They've got 2 kids, 2 twin boys. And what's that like? And especially wondering if their kids are ever going to, have powers.
Yeah.
What's the dichotomy there? How does that relationship work? Because he's not told his kids he's Superman. So he's an absent father as far as they're concerned. So when he's not there, they're just like, where the hell's dad all the time? He's never here. He's never around. So you've got one kid who is pretty well stable, and then the other kid, he's like an emotional, social, anxiety-ridden child who just feels like my dad's never here, and I need somebody, and I need this, and I need that, and I have all these problems. So it's an interesting take on Superman. And I'm not going to say all the episodes are winners, but for the most part, it was pretty solid, the first season. And it recently came on HBO Max. I know it was airing on the CW, but I don't have regular cable, and their app is horrid. I don't recommend watching anything on it. So I just waited. And it was well worth the wait.
Have you seen Jupiter's Legacy?
No, that was one of those that I saw, and there was just something about it that wasn't really catching my attention.
Yeah.
You know? For whatever reason, I'd heard it wasn't all that great either.
Yeah, it's not great. I think I watched an episode or two and I was like, this kind of sucks, but it seems kind of similar in concept where you have like superhero. Well, I guess not really, because it's like superhero family. So like the powers are passed on from parents to children, but the parents like are almost immortal in a way. Like they age, but age super slowly, and they maintain their strength and power. So it's like kind of passing the torch, but the parents like just keep holding on. So the kids grow up kind of disaffected and all that kind of stuff. So it's a superhero show, but it's more about the family dynamics of being a superhero than it is about fighting evil and things like that. So
yeah. What else have I watched? Again, a lot of DC television. Doom Patrol started back up, which, if you've never watched Doom Patrol, I highly recommend it. It just recently, I won't say recently, I'd say about the time the DC app folded, and then they just folded all their stuff over to HBO Max. That was one of those standout shows because I don't even feel like calling it a superhero show is fair, because it's not like anything you'll ever watch as far as that kind of stuff goes. It's within the DC universe. There is a DC character, a more prominent character in the mix, but these are some deep cut characters, and they've got their own problems. They're really messed up bunch, but it's just a fun ride. Just the insanity that goes on in the show. It's a fun ride. I'd highly recommend that one above probably all the ones that I've mentioned. Like, that would be top tier. Definitely check that one out.
yeah, I've heard good things about that.
What else? I did. Okay, here's an interesting one. I recently checked out, and this just started, I think, 2 weeks ago, the remake of The Wonder Years.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you'd seen that
earlier in the podcast.
Did we?
Yeah, obviously before it came out, but just something I don't remember the context that we were talking about it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either, but I thought I'd check it out because I'd heard a few people, tell me to give it a go, and it's definitely a great show, and I appreciate that they aren't trying to just emulate the original, but just say, hey, you remember that what were they, the Arnolds? Remember the Arnolds? Here they are now, but they're black. And that's all that changed. No. They go much deeper.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, I mean, Wonder Years was, in essence, a comedy, but it was undercut with some drama most of the time.
Yeah.
Every now and again. This does the same thing, but with it being in 1968, you're having to deal with a lot of the social issues that black families had at that time. And you're seeing it through a lens of a 12-year-old boy who doesn't necessarily understand the gravity of everything at his age.
Yep.
Like the first episode, they mention Martin Luther King's assassination. Well, he doesn't, like, as everyone around him, like the adults are really reeling from this, like it's hit them hard, he's not quite sure why everyone is so upset. Like he doesn't understand what that means. Like he gets someone's dead, but why is it so important to so many people like that? And it's an interesting take on it. It's an interesting angle to kind of view it through. So I would definitely recommend it. It's definitely got some pretty solid laughs. There was I think it was the second episode, there was a baseball coach who was sitting there whoever this guy was, he was on point and made me laugh like nonstop. Because he just had an energy about him. and his line delivery and his just everything about him. He was just on fire. So it's definitely good for a few good laughs. Definitely a lot of emotion and heart in it to make you think. So I would recommend it if you're wanting to check out something nice and breezy. It's not like you're not going to be weighted down with the drama. It's a nice balance.
Where is that available?
It should be on ABC is where it's airing, so you could probably find it on Hulu. But yeah, definitely check that out if you could. But beyond that, it's just been a few odds and ends stuff here. I can't really think of anything just major that I've really, like, no movies really stand out that I've watched. And I know that there's a few new releases coming out. I mean, it's the first of the month, and it's usually when all the streaming services go back through their loops. So I'm going to have to look around, see if I can find something I haven't seen yet and get around to it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff coming out, and I mean, Dune is finally coming out over here in a few weeks.
Yeah. I don't
The
know
new
what I
Bond
was about
movie
to say.
should be out either next
Yeah.
week. I think next week.
Halloween Kills is one I'm looking forward to, and it should be out 2 weeks, I think.
And just to come back to Shang-Chi real quick, that was the first time my wife and I had been back in a movie theater in quite a while. And so that was fun. And we obviously had seen it after it had been out for 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't crowded. But it was kind of a bummer because now it was sort of relegated to one of the smaller theaters and kind of a smaller screen.
Yeah.
It almost felt like watching it at home, like on a real big, like a really big TV. It almost didn't seem like seeing it at the movies. It was kind of a letdown in that regard, but
And that's understandable.
I think
can
they
see
should
that.
have like a minimum screen size at theaters. It should be something bigger.
something you can't buy and put in your house.
Yeah, right. Pretty much.
Now, there was not that I'm like, it's not a matter of not wanting to go to the theater, but I think there is a bit of feeling spoiled by the VOD because the new Venom movie has come out, and I'll say honestly up front, I'm not huge. I wasn't a big fan of the first movie. Like, I guess I enjoyed the experience in the theater, but I don't ever remember coming back to it. It was just like, yeah, I'll watch that once, and that's about where I've been with it. But I am curious to see this one, despite reviews, because it's up my wheelhouse, I guess, and I'm curious to see it regardless. But at the same time, I was sitting there looking at it going, I kind of wish this was a home release because I don't want to go out to the theater and watch this. Like, I'm not willing to do that, And I've normally, like, if, I guess, pre-pandemic, I would have been like, yep, we got to go see it this weekend because, that's the thing to do. Now it's not top priority. It's just like, I might wait this out, It's not really that big a deal. So I think VOD has spoiled me just a bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah, that's for sure. I was just scrolling HBO Max to see what got released this week, and there's the Sopranos movie, which is day and date. So that released in the theaters yesterday, and I can't imagine that anybody is going to go bother seeing that in the theaters. Considering it's a Sopranos prequel, everybody watched the Sopranos on television, and now this is available on HBO Max. I can't imagine that would be a big draw in the theaters. But there are, just incidentally, there's some pretty good drops on HBO Max if anyone's interested. You talked about Those Who Wish Me Dead a couple podcasts ago, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
You saw that. That's available this week. And then Promising Young Woman is a film that got a lot of buzz last year.
I did hear about that. Yeah, I definitely need to add that.
Yeah, that's now on HBO Max, which I'm definitely going to be watching probably sometime this weekend.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
But,
The Invisible Man was another one, but go ahead.
I do remember a movie that I think I watched during the time we hadn't spoken, Cry Macho, which was
God.
Clint Eastwood's.
You watched that?
I did.
How was
that? Well, I'm a sucker for Clint Eastwood for whatever reason. I just, I've been a fan of his for some time, and it was a Clint Eastwood movie.
Oh my God, I was curious because I like cannot stand Clint Eastwood's like politics and like his personal like anything about him necessarily. Mm-hmm. Although I grew up watching a lot of his movies, and I was kind of curious because like I don't know, just because it was a lot of the stuff I listened to and like Twitter and whatnot was talking about it. So I decided to start watching it one morning, and it struck me as very, very, very bad, very amateur filmmaking, very amateur writing. And I think I got through like a friend of mine called me like while I was watching it. So I stopped watching it and talked to him for a bit, but I never went back and watched it. It was like, it seemed like a very minor film that only got made because Clint Eastwood made it. So,
yeah. I mean, I felt like I checked out midway because something happened, and then suddenly they're stuck in this town. I'm like, what did I miss? But I was sitting there the whole time.
I think I started watching it because I read a review of it, and the premise sounded kind of. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what it was about, and the premise seemed like it could be interesting. Mm-hmm. And I decided to give it a chance against my better judgment. But just watching that opening scene with, it's Dwight Yoakam, right? And it was just so badly written. It was just like every piece of dialogue was this exposition, like, this is the backstory you need to know before we can start telling the story. It's like, come on, like, you should students write like that. Real filmmakers, quote unquote, screenwriters, they shouldn't be writing this way. There's got to be a better way to tell the audience what you want them to know than just telling them through dialogue. It just seemed really bad.
Mm-hmm. And what was interesting about it too, from that perspective, is the moment he sent Clint Eastwood down there to get his son, you see this interaction with his ex-wife, all this stuff. I knew before it even was revealed that Dwight Yoakam's character had an ulterior motive to getting his son back. And even the way it ended, knowing that was the ulterior motive, you're just sitting there left wondering, we're all okay with this, I guess, huh? Cool. Okay. Well, and then it just ends, and you're just like, okay, there you go.
I'm not surprised.
So, I watched it. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again.
I kind of like he gets away with it because of who he is, and he gets to make movies. But I appreciate being able to make these kind of minor movies, because I think there should be a place for them. Not everything should be Shang-Chi. We talked about that a lot. So I appreciate that somebody gets to do the kinds of things that they want to do. It doesn't have to be some massive blockbuster. It can be kind of weird and off kilter. But this just struck me as like just not that well done, in a way. So,
I mean, he is 90.
Yeah, he definitely.
He's probably just like, I ain't got time, so let's just go.
Right.
And I've heard he's that kind of director. If he feels like he's got a take, he's just like, let's go.
I heard that too. I was listening to some podcast or a podcast that was kind of going over this movie and him as a director, and it's just like, we're going to be done and we're going to have a long lunch and then we're going to go for a few more hours and we'll be out of here, which is also really cool because I feel like a lot of movies are taken way too seriously and people are worked to the bone, and that's not a good thing. Like there's so much money wrapped up in it, so people are kind of cracking the whip, but at the end of the day, it's like it's like the least important thing that anybody could be doing, with their time. But it's taken seriously, like they're fighting a war in a way. So that's kind of refreshing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse, I guess. I've seen worse.
Oh, it could be worse. It could be Velocipaster.
Yeah, that's true. Or avalanche sharks or whatever. That's another topic.
Sharknado.
We're going to get into that, at some point. But hey, let's talk about what we came here to talk about today, because ironically, since I'd been saying I'd been watching a lot of television, it might actually be a good time to talk about it. Because I want to talk about where we've gotten in television today versus where it started. And I guess I just want to explore why how we've gotten to this point and why. Because there used to be a time, like when television started, it really didn't seem like it had anything more than, you had your little variety hour. You had some of these comedians had shows, vaudeville, Abbott and Costello types that would come on, and they'd have their little variety hour with their sponsor and whomever, and then that would be your show. I didn't grow up with television in the 40s and 50s, so I couldn't tell you how the structure worked. But you have, as it grew, you get into more procedural television, I guess would be the proper word, where everything is structured. You got a set amount of episodes. You have a set structure of what the sitcom formula is. So it's like about a family, and then there's funniness, and what wacky adventures are happening this week. And then that's that. Procedural drama, same thing. You have whatever structure, whether it's a lawyer show, cop show. There's no real growth to any type of characters except for maybe like the beginning and the end of the season, if it lasts that long. And they're just so common about their formula. Everything is formulaic. So at some point we see a shift in television to where everything is a little bit more story driven. And I'm not going to say that everything is like that now, but there was a shift. And I'm not really sure where it happened, but there was a shift to where television was pretty predictable. And if you were going to be sold on something, it was just a matter of like, who's in it? What's the premise? And could you just enjoy it for what it is for, 24 weeks straight, seeing the same thing over and over and over, just with a slightly different story. But now we have television that seems to be more condensed. You get, full seasons that are anywhere between 10 to 13 episodes, roughly estimated. The stories are tighter. You've got actors coming in who you wouldn't necessarily think of for television. And that's even an interesting thing to explore that we can look at too. I remember a time when television was almost kind of like you have your television actors, you have your movie actors. There was no crossover. And then sometimes you'd have a television actor try to make their way into movies, and it would either work or it wouldn't. And I don't know, it's fascinating to me. So let's see if you can help dissect where this shift may have come in, because I honestly can't think of where television started to grow as more of a more interesting medium that more people would actually take to. Because take, for example, superheroes, I guess. It used to be like they're theater only. Now we've got kind of a mix. You have some who are not deemed, I guess, not yet quite theater worthy, and then you've got those others who, can make it that far. So how did we get here? That's what I want to look at.
Wow. Well, I hope you're not looking at me for answers here, because I got none. Anything that I offer is just going to be pure speculation. So I hope that's valuable to somebody.
That's fine. Because, like I said, I really can't. I guess an era somewhere in AMC is where I can kind of think. I've got
AMC?
it pinpointed. Yeah, like Mad Men and Breaking Bad, like when they kind of took off. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was the moment it happened.
Right.
But it was kind of within that era that I can remember where everyone was like, you know what, television can really take,
Yeah, I think that's pretty much kind of the consensus, is that like maybe The Sopranos, even before that, a few years prior to that, and then AMC obviously with those two shows, and The Wire. Those were the two networks that kind of spearheaded that whole prestige TV decade that we're still living in, more or less. But I think, I don't know what shift occurred. again, I'm such a cynical person. It probably comes down to money, which is my answer for everything. But I do think, when we were growing up and before, there was definitely a split. I think you're right about that, between movies and TV. And I think that movies were seen as the more prestigious and more important, in a way, medium than TV was. And maybe it had to do with the way it was financed. You had, because this was way before cable, so everything was broadcast TV. So you're dependent on ad dollars and ad revenue, and everything's just like now, even still, where every show's broken up into segments, interrupted by advertisements. So I think that had that quality, or that structure had the effect of lowering the perceived value of what was being offered, because it was ad driven. And whereas movies were not, they're financed however they were financed, through magic. And therefore they were looked, looked at as a higher art form, quote unquote. And then it's not surprising that something like HBO, which isn't ad driven, was able to make a show like The Sopranos that kind of started turning the tables, and then more people kind of were able to see that there were possibilities here to tell stories in a way that you can't tell in a movie. Much longer form stories, much more detailed, much more character driven and psychological. And I think a lot of people kind of gravitated towards that as a new way to explore this visual medium, whether TV or movies. But yeah, it's almost like a novel now in comparison to a short film, or excuse me, like a short story. Movies would be the short story, TV could be the novel. Essentially.
And it makes me wonder too, if there was ever anyone, because there had to be. You can't tell me from maybe even in the 50s, that might be generous, say 60s, 70s. So nowhere from that point up to where television started taking the shift, that anyone decided, you know what, can we not do something a little bit more interesting with television? Can we not try to...
Well, we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think All in the Family definitely was kind of interesting, and they're definitely trying to do some things there. And there must be more. I mean, I'm obviously going to leave out so many. I remember in our lifetime, NYPD Blue, which was not a show that I ever really watched, but that was one that got a lot of praise as like a serious show. That, beyond your standard potboiler kind of police procedural up to that point on television, this one kind of dived in a little bit deeper into the subject matter. And again, I'm not familiar with the show, but I just kind of remember that being a kind of a precursor almost to what came after on HBO and AMC. And that was a show I think that aired on ABC. Yeah. And it was, I can't remember the lead actor, but like...
David Caruso?
No, he was an older, kind of like stocky, not a quote-unquote attractive guy.
I know who you're talking about.
They showed his butt on one scene, and that was so controversial. It's amazing to think back, like in the 90s, like showing a man's butt would...
Dennis Franz.
Yeah, that's it. Wow, good memory.
Yeah.
So there's another one, and that's, of course, that's in the 90s are getting further and further away from us now, but... And there must have been others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's take that avenue for a second, because, okay, so they showed his, backside at that time. We've actually seen kind of a shift to that on television today, because there has been like this slow moving push back among censorship. Now, I do understand that. I can't remember exactly where I heard this. I was actually watching something. It was actually talking about this sweet spot on television that used to exist, and it may exist in some form or fashion today. Is just not anything relegated by the FCC, but more like a sign of good faith. Like maybe a 1 to 2 hour block. Yeah, 1 to 2 hour block somewhere between, let's say, 7 and 9, which would be Central Time is what we're kind of talking about. Somewhere between that time, that's when you have your family shows
Right.
where you try to leave all your risque stuff for later in the evening. And I kind of remember that. You know, you remember watching the more wholesome shows, and then later at night it'd be like, oh, it's the dark show, like, you know, Law and Order is coming on, or ER, or whatever older show I'm not thinking of. But that always kind of used to be the case, and I'd say to a point it still exists, but not necessarily either. Because I've seen some shows that kind of push the boundaries, and I don't think they're doing it maliciously or to be like, ha, fuck you. You know, look what we're doing. We're getting away with murder at 7 o'clock. I think it's just where we've kind of evolved with television, because another network that tried to push the boundaries early on, and I still feel like is doing it now, is FX.
Yeah.
Like when they launched, The Shield, I think, was like their big premiere cop show, and it was like, let's see how we push it. And they would push it to, it almost seemed like as far as they could without stepping over that line.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in this field. But I did I did take a course in college about entertainment law, and there was a section about broadcast TV versus cable and how they're regulated differently by the FCC and what they cannot show. And they are. So FX had more leeway to do things than ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. You know, they have different standards essentially. I don't know if they're still the same, but
I feel like FX, or at least the cable networks, have to have been given more leeway at some point, because they're getting away with.
Definitely.
Yeah.
They have much more, and it's been that way from the beginning. Like HBO, you know, they were able, you could run uncensored movies on HBO back in the 80s when they came out, Showtime, etc. And then USA Network, like they're definitely not, and I wish I could remember the particulars of like the regulations, but they definitely do not have the same restrictions on content that your broadcast networks do, because the broadcast networks, they owe their existence to the federal government because they broadcast over the air on government-owned airwaves, whereas cable doesn't. The cable is distributed via private networks essentially, so they definitely have different standards.
But I guess what I want to know as far as that goes, because even talking about television, censorship standards vary from country to country. That's another thing that I've noticed too. And so with FX, let's just say like when The Shield came on, they pushed as far as they could. Now they can do just about anything, say anything, except for full frontal nudity just about, because they're dropping F-bombs like crazy. They talk about just the most inane stuff, but it's like nudity is almost, it's that last line they've yet to be able to cross. And it's weird that you're saying you can say the nastiest stuff you want, but nudity, that's a line too far. We can't have that. It's like you're basically HBO at this point without the nudity. So it's weird.
Yeah, there's very bizarre barriers between different platforms. It doesn't really make any sense,
But I mean, even with that, I'll even say this: it almost seems like that there are other barriers, but I don't know if this is cable related, like the networks themselves regulating this, or if they are being forced to. But like I said, FX can seem like they can get away with just about anything. I heard, and this was a something I was interested in, and I don't know if you heard about this show coming on, but I think next week, USA and Sci-Fi are simultaneously airing a Chucky TV show. And when I heard that, I was like, TV for Chucky? I said, you can't. How are you going to do that? Especially on one of those networks. That was kind of my mindset, because it just seems like he would be neutered, you know, based on the type of character he is. And apparently they have a quota of how many times they can say fuck. But that just seems weird. So you're saying over here you can get away with it just about as much as you want, but over here you have a quota. So why is that different? It's just
I don't
weird.
know. It would be really interesting to figure out. Well, I don't know if it'd be interesting for a lot of people, but for me, I think it would be interesting to figure out what those differences are. And like I said, I had some exposure to some of the basics of that, but it seems like now it's getting like more and more segmented now that we have so many different types of media. Mm-hmm. And what are the standards? Even if you think about like Netflix, like what's the governing body that's governing what Netflix can and cannot show? I don't know that there is one, but it does seem like there's still there's still areas where even Netflix won't go. Like I can't think of any Netflix original programming that would have like egregious or gratuitous, I guess is the word I meant to say, like nudity in it, right? Like, so.
But
Yeah.
violence seems to be like
of course.
the rage, which is weird because in other countries it's the opposite.
Always in America, it's like violence is okay. It's totally okay for the most part, but
nudity,
sex is a no-go.
Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, hey, we couldn't show a bare ass on Disney Plus now. You know, that was just a step too far in a non-sexual way, but a bare ass, no.
I can't wait to see if Disney Plus starts censoring their huge back catalog of non-Disney movies. Because didn't you mention that they were like taking stuff out of a movie that had aired or that had been released previously?
Well, Splash was the one I was just referencing, where they had covered up Daryl Hannah's backside, and it was just
fucked up.
Yeah, there was nothing sexual about it. Nothing. It was just her backside. We all have them. We've all seen an ass.
Well, I mean, it's still titillating.
Yeah, but come on.
Because we go to such lengths to make it so, you know, to cover up.
Right.
So the sight of one is like, oh my God, look at that.
It seems ludicrous, but you're right. I mean, at what point are they going to sit there and say, you know what, we need to censor all the foul language, or well, this is a little too scary. I mean, they're practically saying that parents can't regulate what their children watch. If you feel like it needs to be behind,
parents can't let their children leave the house anymore without someone calling the cops on them. So that's the world we live in currently. So
yeah, it's bizarre. But yet you go on television, and what do you have? You have the same stuff. You have worse stuff. Mm-hmm. So,
which is why we can't let anybody leave the house, because we're training everybody to be psycho serial killers, but only within the bounds of their own homes.
I mean, by their logic, I guess a cartoon ass is different than a
because
human
remember
ass.
when Bart's bare ass aired on The Simpsons, and that was such a huge controversy that there was so much like this show is just I can't believe that this is being aired and children are watching it.
Yeah, but they're not censoring Bart Simpson's ass either on the platform. So it's just
I guess The Simpsons would be airing on Disney because it's Fox.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've not done any censoring there. How many swear words?
That would be bizarre.
It would.
It was bizarre back in the 1989, 90, 91, whenever that first aired, that people would be offended by that. Like, that shit says a lot about you as a person, that you'd be offended by that. But it would be, bizarre to retroactively censor that, because then it's like, do you really think that's offensive? Like an animated 10-year-old's butt? Is that somehow like anyway. Can we take a break real quick? Sorry, I had to get another beer because I have a problem with drinking. But anyway, carry on.
But no, I mean, the censorship like that, it's ridiculous. But yet, you continue to look at everything that they're airing on television now. Everything seems to be upping the quota there. Violence in general on television has gone up. I remember one time where it was taboo to even show just the slightest little amount of blood. I mean, you had to be on that real late night push, but now, I mean, you have shows like American Horror Story, Chucky is coming out. I mean, they're not going to pull any punches. They're going to show as gratuitous as they can, and I'm sure a lot of this could be, I don't want to say blamed, but kind of coincide with the what do you call it? I know they have a term, the rating system they have for television, the TVG, TVMA, and all that stuff. If you feel like it's outside the realm of where you need it, up your rating. You know, they've been talking about re-rating a TV show that came out, I think, in the early 2000s. One of those, it was, what do you call it? The Legend of Korra, which is like the Nickelodeon Last Avatar sequel show.
Yeah.
Because there was an episode that, as far as they're concerned, they being whoever's got their panties in a bunch about this, saying that they depicted suicide in a scene. And I can see where you could see it, but it wasn't like blatantly he took a gun to his head and killed himself. It was one of those, you look at the way the scene is structured and it's implied, you can kind of figure out what happened. Mm-hmm. But the shows have always teetered a line to where they're not necessarily catering to children. Mm-hmm. And they have more adult themes, I guess. And I honestly thought when my wife was telling me about it, I was like, so I'm assuming it was because of the supposed, which, I mean, has been confirmed, but I think the last scene of that show in the series finale, it was implied that the two female leads were now an item.
Oh, no.
And people were like, because all they did was hold hands and look at each other.
What it's led to.
Yeah, it's my God. So the ridiculousness of that alone, that this is the culture that we live in, that the censorship, the censoring of things that you weren't censoring, I don't know. It's a weird path we've come down. Everything is more open, but yet you're going to censor all this other stuff. So it's bizarre.
I feel like this is all interesting conversation. I feel like we kind of got away from the original premise, though, about when TV changed, how it became something different than what it was. And you mentioned like a bifurcation between like movie actors and TV actors. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people there was no kind of dipping in both pools. Essentially, you might have some actors who wanted to go from TV to movies, but you definitely didn't have movie actors who wanted to go to TV.
Right.
And now maybe you do. But let's go back to the before days. Who were some of the actors that you remember who wanted to jump from TV to movies?
One that I could think of right off the top of my head would probably be someone like Lucille Ball. Obviously,
oh, wow.
she had she had one of the biggest, if not the biggest sitcom mm-hmm. of all time when she started back out. And it was a good, I don't know all the behind the scenes, so that's all we're talking about, but it was big for her. And I think movie studios saw that she had potential to possibly be something bigger than just a TV star. She would be in all these other, or she would be in a movie here with someone like Bob Hope or whatever other actor was big at the time, another comedic actor she could work, in tandem with. But it never seemed to be a breakout thing for her because she wound up back on television twice, doing another Lucy show or this Lucy show. And so why is it that she couldn't make that break? That's another interesting thing that would be worth exploring, I guess. Or maybe it's not all that fascinating. Who knows? But it just seems like she, despite her potential to be a funny lady, film just wasn't where she was strongest.
Right.
Because she didn't have that film career. She had films done, but she was best known for all of her TV work.
Right.
And it's interesting. But then you have someone like Bruce Willis. We're going to fast forward to...
That's a good one.
Yeah. You go back to his moonlighting days.
And that's before that. It also, in the reverse, works in the reverse, too, because Sybil Shepherd was a movie star before she was on TV.
Right. And so you look at that interesting take of things, because she really kind of got relegated to television mm-hmm. around that point. Not to say that she probably didn't have a movie or two.
Yeah, there's something about her, and I don't know what it is. Something. I'm not going to speculate, but something that kind of pushed her in that direction, maybe against her will. I don't know the whole story there, but
yeah.
But that's another good show. That I don't know that it was considered like prestigious in any way, but I think it had some. It was definitely kind of a big. It was a hit. Mm-hmm. As far as I can remember, I was very young at the time when that was airing. Right. But I mean, it was still in my world because my parents watched it, and you know, I remember people talking about it. Even then, I was just really young at the time, but and it seemed like maybe that was a show that was kind of, I don't know, kind of straddling that line between glamorous movies and much less glamorous television. Maybe it was, and again, this is just sort of speculation, maybe that was kind of a forerunner or, you know, one of those progenitor kind of shows that showed that TV could be more than just a medium for pushing advertisements.
Right.
Because you did have Sybil Shepherd in it, and then Bruce Willis obviously went on to become a huge movie star. And maybe the quality of it and the premise behind it was something that hadn't been seen on TV before that. Yeah, it seemed more adult, I think. Right. But funny, too.
And there's not to say that there aren't examples out there of television that was trying to do something different. Because, I mean, kind of going back a little bit to when you mentioned All in the Family, they were pushing boundaries. They were trying to do something new, but at the same time, they were still adhering to a formulaic television show. What are you doing? You take a look at just about every episode of, I'll just say this, for the first 4 seasons that I've actually gotten through here lately, the house is like the primary spot. They hardly ever go out. They hardly ever leave the house.
You know, it's filmed on set, on location. Like, right. You don't film, like anything that's filmed not on the soundstage, like, it basically doesn't exist.
And that's what I'm talking about. It was that formula. You didn't try to go outside of the norms. It was just like, well, we have to write to everything here. It's a sitcom. Now, you can have all these wacky things happen, like, say Sammy Davis Jr. shows up at his house. The hell is that going to happen? But we just go with it because this is where you have to do it. And it's just this formula, despite what they're trying to push.
And the other thing about it is formulaic, too, because it has to adhere to that, you know, ad spot structure where you have a 30-minute show essentially is only 22 minutes because it's broken up into maybe, I don't remember the exact ratio, 4 2-minute ad sections. So this show has to be written with those ad breaks in mind. So there has to always be kind of a crescendo between like ad spots, or there has to be a cliffhanger leading up to an ad spot that gets, you know, picked up again once the show resumes. So you definitely have, of course, movies have a very specific structure, but there's it's not structured to such a high degree as a television show is. And I think that's another reason why it was maybe looked down upon, because it's like, again, just a medium for selling cars and toothpaste. And then something like The Sopranos can totally break the mold because that's a subscription cable channel and they're not selling anything except for HBO subscriptions.
HBO started, was it back in the 90s? They really started doing more original television, because I was trying to remember some of the shows that they did
Oz was
early
a big
on.
One.
I'm trying to think farther back than that. And I'm trying to think of...
I don't know. I'm trying to think of anything that comes to mind.
Yeah. I was trying to see if there was something that really stood out as like, this is the thing that made HBO is like, holy crap, you've got to have HBO for this show. But stuff like Oz and The Wire really seemed like they were the heavy hitters, but there's got to be something way back when that they were pushing at the time. I know they had a few sitcoms here and there, some late night shows, but nothing stands out as like, this is why you have to have HBO. Like they hadn't quite...
Mr. Show, wasn't that a big kind of...
Mr. Show, that was one, yeah. Damn, I can't remember. It's been so long. I would have to do some digging. You're probably doing it right now.
I'm trying to.
But while we're talking about sitcoms, it's
Kids in
funny.
the Hall, The Larry Sanders Show.
Kids in the Hall, man. Why didn't I think of that? Hell yeah.
Tenacious D.
Yeah.
Sex in the City. That was definitely a huge one.
Curb Your Enthusiasm, I know would be
but even that comes after The Sopranos,
today.
I believe. I'm trying to look back into the 90s.
Larry Sanders, yeah, that's a really good one.
Larry Sanders.
That's a good pull.
Yeah, I think Sex and the City, Larry Sanders, Arliss was one. That wasn't a really big. That wasn't a big hit.
I remember it vaguely.
Yeah.
But you take a look at these. I mean, they had sitcoms on HBO, and I guess they had their. I mean, they were a variation of that. Most sitcoms that we kind of grew up on, they were the filmed on set live or whatever. What would they always say at the beginning of the? This is filmed
before
in
live
front
studio
of us.
audience.
Yeah, they'd always say that. You'd have the laugh tracks or whatever. I personally have. I guess I lean more into the single camera where they don't have the laugh tracks. They allow.
Yeah.
You
like
know,
a movie.
yeah, it's actually so much better. Like I prefer not to have the laugh track, but that's not to say that I can't watch one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last one that I really watched, as far as a newer one that still utilized that, was Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
And I mean, it didn't bother me, but it was odd to kind of go back to that format because it was like I've been watching so many of these sitcoms without it.
Does the Young Sheldon show have a laugh track, or do they go away from that?
No, they went back to single camera.
Right
so it does give it a different energy too, which
absolutely.
is kind of nice.
And there's some news like essays and articles out in the last couple of weeks about just like the death throes of broadcast TV. I mean, they're struggling to get any ratings, gain any traction with new programming. It's all going to like they're trying to figure out like what goes to, because now they all have their own streaming services, right? So they're trying to figure out like what shows go to streaming, what shows go to broadcast. Do they go to broadcast and streaming? Like it's rough right now for traditional TV, whatever. Like, and that kind of, you know, when you look at even like, does AMC even exist? Like, are they still even like airing new prestige shows anymore? Like, does anybody care? Because it seems like aside from HBO, which now has, of course, its own streaming service, and then FX also goes to whatever, Disney, I suppose. It's all streaming now. And is that even, and so in streaming, you do have movie stars, Hollywood directors who are making content for streaming, but is that TV?
Yeah.
You know, I guess it is TV because we watch it on our TVs, but it's not anything like what TV used to be, right?
Right. And we could even go into the discussion of binge watching, you know, something we didn't grow up with. I mean, as much as we could possibly binge watch anything, it would be 2 episodes of something on syndication, you know, that they would air in the afternoon or late night, possibly if they did a back-to-back. But most of the time, I mean, we didn't have binge watching. Now we've kind of seen this shift where these streaming services are starting to hold back, and they're going back to that week-to-week formula, which, to be honest, I didn't realize I missed until they started doing it.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like the right thing to do. Not to say that I don't have my binge watching, you know, moments where I want to binge watch something, but there is something about it to where I like just being given tidbits of something little at a time. And
well, it's definitely a difference in platform, because, like, you know, HBO still doles out their shows on a weekly basis, but Netflix and Amazon just seem to dump them. I can't think of.
I had a question based on that, because there are, say for example, Hulu. There are shows that I watch on Hulu that air on, I think it's ABC, FX, but I don't watch them after they come out as far as like a binge watch, but it's more like, hey, we're going to air it on television tonight,
And then it comes
and
to
you can
Hulu.
watch it tomorrow. And then that's how I kind of watch my shows. If other streaming services did that, do you think it would make just broadcast television, like actual cable, obsolete? If they allowed that to continue?
It already is obsolete. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
but I mean, in the sense that they would never have to worry about where you were talking about, they have to decide, well, what goes here, what goes there. I mean, to me, I think it's great because you're kind of giving incentive to those people who want to watch those shows that day and they have to be there. Like a show that I watch, and you can call this a guilty pleasure or not. I kind of like it. I'm not big into reality shows, but The Masked Singer, it's one of those competition shows. I can't watch it until the day after it's aired, so whoever was unmasked could easily be spoiled for me, if I go digging around the internet. But I luckily have not had anything spoiled, and I just watch it the next day, and I'm happy with it. It doesn't bother me. But I understand those people who want to be involved, who want to be on Twitter, who want to be there live as it's all happening. And I guess I don't see why it would hurt any of the networks to just have this. You can watch it here, but you can also watch it on our streaming platform day later, or maybe even a week.
Well, it hurts them because they rely on advertisement. They rely on ad dollars to fund their entire business model. And that's why it's so lucrative for them to have captive audience on the airwaves, because there was no other avenue to watch content. Now that there's so many different avenues to watch content that you can basically get on demand, nobody, it's such a diminished audience for the traditional model. So they're struggling to make any money, and which is why they're scrambling to, make streaming services. But now they have to compete now on a totally new platform against the established players, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, in order to, pry back the audience. So that's why it's, CBS, or where does Masked Singer air?
That's on Fox.
That's on Fox. So, I'm sure they would much rather have the audience watching it live on TV, because they have the advertiser is paying so much for the ad spots, and they don't get the same ad revenue when people watch it on the streaming platform. So that's the difference.
And that's understandable. But in today's hectic society, as we like to say, everything, we're just moving at 100 miles a minute. On demand just seems easier for a lot of people.
It's totally easier for the consumer, but on the other hand, the content creators, the platforms they still have to figure out a way to make money on it. And so that's where we are, I think.
There's nothing out there that's stopping them from putting ads on a lot of that stuff on Hulu.
Yeah, except Peacock. But then the audience might go away because they're used to Netflix with no ads.
Well, I mean,
so that's the struggle. Like, we have, for instance, Peacock and Hulu. We've dabbled in Hulu from time to time, but I mean, we can't afford every fucking platform. Right. So Hulu does have an ad-based service, but it's really hard to go, back to watching advertisements on your shows when you can go to the other thing. But, it's not, of course, we are paying, nothing's free. Of course, we're paying for Netflix. We're paying for HBO. We're paying for the right to not have to sit through the ads. So, it's just, of course, if everybody had unlimited funds, they could subscribe to everything and then everybody would be happy. But that's not the case. So it's still just a battle between figuring out how you're going to get the audience to your show and how you're going to get them to pay for it. So either they pay directly to you or the advertisers pay you. So right. that's the conundrum that they're in right now, I think.
But it's something that I hope is not, as you say, it's a diminishing return, but I really hope that it doesn't get to a point where we don't have a lot of these shows that we can't have because they feel like they're not willing to take a risk or a chance on something because they don't know if it'll generate their ad revenue. I honestly feel like that in some cases, and I could be wrong, I've never been a television executive, but it could be a matter of we're getting stronger narratives from television because they're not having to gamble on bigger budgets for 22, 24 episodes, so they cut it in half. They try to say, well, limit what you can do here. Your budget will be halved, but you can still do whatever you wanted. And then in the process, the writers are like, well, how do we get through this season in 13 episodes or less? I don't know if that's the case, because I have heard, well, they're taking away money from this, this, and this, but can't you still tell the same narrative within the confines of this budget? Again, don't know all the specifics of television and whatnot, but you'd think if you had less episodes, you'd have a smaller budget to work with and still write out something solid. Just my 2 cents on that.
I don't know how that works either. Like, you're talking about like basically compressing a 22 episode season into like a 12 episode season, but having access to the same budget as a
or
22.
less.
What's that?
I would even say less than in some way, because I mean they're worried about, say, well, if you're going to do 22 episodes, we need, again, don't know television money. Say we need $40 million for 22 episode season. It's like, oh, okay. Well, how about this? How about we cut it in half and then you just give us 20 million? That seems like it would be better for the network to take a gamble on the show, to be like, okay, well, we can do that because it's less money, less episodes. Seems like the risk is less.
The 22 episode formula is based on like, and I don't know, I think it's arbitrary in essence, like the television season. You had a fall season and I guess a spring or a new year. I don't know.
Yeah.
And you had a lull between like winter, spring, and then obviously summer was kind of like the reruns season. So you needed those 22 episodes to fill up that whole that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if you're still going with that broadcast TV model, you can't have a 10 episode run, because then you have so much dead time. Then you've got to fill it with a new show, essentially. So that would just, which is possible, I suppose, but it would just take a total rethinking of like the broadcast TV model.
Yeah.
Where again, it is possible, because if you look at other countries, like in England, like the BBC, like we get a lot of BBC shows over here, and they're typically 4, 5, 6 episodes for an entire series, right?
Yeah.
And they might even be, instead of like our typical 30 minutes or an hour, they might be an hour and a half long episodes. So there are definitely other models that can work. But
yeah, I've always been fascinated with the British model of television, because it is every season of any show, however long they run, it's about 6 episodes, and that's it. That's your season. Mm-hmm. And it seems like you could get so much more out of that.
Yeah.
Like you are laser focused on what can we do in 6 episodes, where do we want to start, where do we want to end and go. And it just, again, I don't know all the specifics of why we've done these things of 22 episodes, despite proof that we can work in a different medium. I mean, if you have a 12 or 13 episode show, say that's your fall show, and then you come back in winter or spring, and that you've got another show. Budgets, would it matter? Like if you gave 40 million to this show and said, here, do 22 versus 2 separate shows, 20 million. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It feels like the shows would benefit, be stronger if you weren't forcing them to do these long runs. Sitcoms, I could see where it could work. Mm-hmm. But even to a point, I mean, how many more damn seasons of The Simpsons can you do?
I've been asking that question for 20 years. That's
what I'm saying. I mean, I'm sure you can get fresh takes on everything, but God, 30 years,
man. It makes a show like Lost so interesting. But that was definitely an outlier in a huge gamble for ABC to take, where you had kind of a high concept, big budget sci-fi show, which of course the writers didn't know what the fuck was going on with that and didn't know where it was going to go, and they just kind of were winging it. But that's a 22 episode run every season. That's a lot of TV, and if you look, maybe if it were produced nowadays, it would probably be a 10 episode season, and what a different show it would have been if that were the case. And
hopefully they'd known where they were going before they got there, because you could write to that. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure we got way off topic or we stayed on television, but veered left and right into different avenues of what we're trying to get to. I don't know. It's just television in general. I mean, it's grown so much. It's still growing, especially with the advent of streaming. Who knows where it's going to be? And I just find it fascinating. But I'm also leaning so much towards the on-demand streaming. I hate to be that person because I've advocated so long for not to be that.
I don't give a shit. Like I'm a big advocate for the movies, but TV can essentially fuck off for all I care. Like I hate advertisements. I don't watch them. Like I tune out every time an advertisement comes on. I still watch sports.
Yeah.
And I hate it. I hate advertisements. So I don't give a shit about TV. And I don't have cable. I hadn't had cable in probably 10, 15 years. And, Netflix can be kind of mind-numbing, and there's not always a lot of great content on Netflix, but there is a pretty decent amount of good stuff on there. And I don't know how long that can continue. Same thing with, the other streaming platforms. In my mind, within reason, again, like maybe 3 streaming platforms is all we can kind of budget for, but that's a lot of shit of good stuff to watch, like new stuff and old, like Seinfeld is now airing on Netflix, and Buffy is on Amazon, and there's a lot of really great stuff that you can watch basically at any time. And I don't really care if the network TV model kind of goes away. Unfortunately, like there's been a lot of great stuff. And but again, nothing is forever. Nothing is guaranteed. And as long as there's a new platform that can accommodate, good creative people and good storytelling, and that's all that really matters, I think. And I think we're seeing a lot of really good things coming out on the new platforms.
I am happy that we are getting stronger television, and I'm glad people are taking risks on this television. I'm disappointed in certain decisions over shows. Of my,
but that's always been the case. I mean, there's always been those cult shows that just didn't get the audience, and then they get canceled, and then there's an outcry. But it's like, again, it's all financial. If it didn't make money, and
one that recently aired, and I don't know if you watched this or not, but I was really surprised it got canceled, was Lovecraft Country on HBO.
Yeah.
And now, granted, it ended satisfactory, I guess, to where I don't really guess you need another season, but I really was looking forward to one. And that was disappointing because I don't know. I'd always heard everyone was always going on about it, saying it was a great show. I was watching it every week. I was enjoying it, and I don't understand why it got canned like it did. It was just, like you said, it could have been a financial thing.
I mean, that's the other thing. Well, it's always been kind of opaque, I guess. Like they don't necessarily have to tell you the reasons for why things go away versus other things. I mean, maybe it's like somebody disliked it and somebody didn't like this one, and maybe it was just an exec that has that power, or maybe someone on the showrunner pissed somebody off. I mean, who knows why?
Yeah.
But again, there's nothing guaranteed. It had a good run. It was a good set of episodes, and then everybody can go on and do something different. I don't think it's the end of the world necessarily.
I guess I just like knowing that it had a satisfactory ending versus shows that end with that cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And then you're just left wondering the rest of your days, like, what happened? What happened? I don't know.
Well, that's where fanfic comes in, so.
Yeah. I guess I have my things here and there, like a movie or two that, like, if I don't like a sequel, I'm just like, no, it ended right there for me. I'm good. I don't need all that other crap. So,
well, I love, I think the great thing about the time that we're living in, or one of the other good things about our options nowadays, are there's so many great international shows that get picked up. The past, we didn't have that avenue. Like, I'm trying to think, like, of course, when cable came about, there were, foreign language cable channels that you could subscribe to. And satellite, of course, would give you some options there. But, now a huge show on Netflix right now that's just getting so much buzz and press is Squid Game. the South Korean show, and like, you know, just the fact that you have the options to watch shows from like so many different countries, and I don't know.
Yeah, South Korea, like, I'd heard about Squid Game before it really blew up. My sister-in-law had brought it up, and she was like, you guys got to check this out. And then less than a week later, everybody's like, Squid Game! And I was like, well, I guess it was going to happen. But it's interesting that I've kind of taken note once I found out that was South Korean. They have a lot of good cinema. And
Oh, yeah.
As far as television, this would probably be my first foray into Korean television, but they've got a lot of good stuff. And I think it's one of those things that I don't necessarily seek out any Korean films or Korean television, but when I watch one, I'm always impressed with them. Like, damn, that was a solid movie. Damn, that was a good movie, you know? So, yeah, it's something to keep in mind. I think we definitely should watch Squid Game before our next chat, because it is something on my radar.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know,
I started watching it, so it's pretty good.
How many episodes do you know, right offhand?
I think there's like 8.
8? Okay, so about an hour a piece, give or take?
Yes, in the ballpark.
Okay. So I could probably get through it in a week if I binged,
Yeah,
you know, a
should
little
binge.
here and there.
I just started. I'm not that far into it, so I got some work to do as well.
All right, well, Squid Game. Won't be our full conversation, but we'll probably talk about it next time we chat. But that's all I got to say on television. I'm sure we could go on longer if I could keep my thoughts straight about where we're going, but it's been all over the map. We're just talking about TV. What about TV? Where we've gone, where we've been, where we're at, TV.
Sayonara TV.
Yeah.
Days are numbered.
2030, the death of television. I don't know. I'm taking a guess. But, you know, thank you to everyone listening out there. You got a topic you want us to talk about? If you've got some opinions on television, hit us up on Twitter. #CinemaSalsa. You can find our little ats, Philip Peck and Stephen White. You know where to find us on the Twitters. And if you want, tell your friends to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Podbean, YouTube.com/Pencil Paper Productions, or even better, you can just head on over to pencilpaperproductions.com/Cinema Salsa, and there's your one-stop shop for everything Cinema Salsa. It's that easy. You could probably even follow a button over there, and it can tell you every time something drops. Maybe. I don't know. I'm still working on it, damn it. I'll get there. It's a long process. I need a team. That's what I need.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. Follow everything from there if you want. Just bookmark it, and there you go. You'll always find Cinema Salsa. Anyway, be sure to join us again next time. But until then, keep supporting your local theater.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.